Hi. Hello. Hi, hi, hi. My name is Synergy. I am a drag queen and activist, and I'm so excited to be here chatting with you today. I'm based in Olympia, Washington, and perform all over the Pacific Northwest.
Okay, absolutely. And so, is there anything else we should know before we go into anything? Do you want to tell us specifically anything about how you grew up, and start there and kind of the
Sure.
stuff that you've seen before we go into any of our questions or anything?
Absolutely. Yeah. I grew up on the Gulf Coast. I was born and raised in Texas. And that's where I started doing drag in 1999. So she's been doing drag since last century, folks. And I lived there until I was 21. And then as soon as I finished college, I left Texas. I moved to Mississippi, Alabama, and then lived in New Orleans for a very long time. And then eventually moved to Washington almost 15 years ago.
Wow. Okay. Perfect. Perfect. And so, all right. And so, moving around, just because I know you've been in certain different places. So I know you've been in the East, you've been in the West, the South. What's your experience? With just those different places, basically.
Well, I think that if we're talking about experience as it applies to drag or even being queer in these different places.
In a vague sense, just because we could say oh, what's the reception of drag or anything, but in general, your feeling of just being in let's say Tennessee versus or wherever you've been, what's the feeling between the East and the West? Why have you stayed where you've been for the longest time, if anything, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think that, I think when we look at sort of geographical differences and the things that really stand out to me, I think the South, growing up in the South, there's a veneer of politeness and manners, and you were raised a certain way, which doesn't necessarily show up in other parts of the country. The yes ma'am, the no ma'am, the Southern cooking, all of that stuff, right? So there's that part of it, and and I miss that part. I miss that part of this, of growing up in the South. However, I think when you start shifting and looking beneath that veneer, and it gets a little deeper and you get into things that impact your life, like sociopolitical outlooks and positions, it even becomes more different. And I have found that living in the East, living in the West, there's actually I feel like there's more similarities between the two coasts than there are with the South, although that is another coast. But the reason I think I ultimately moved, I know that I moved to the Pacific Northwest was it is just so much easier to be yourself and be accepted as yourself in the Pacific Northwest. And for me, being myself was a vibrantly queer homosexual drag queen who is living her best almost 50-year-old life. But that's why I came to the Pacific Northwest, and that's what keeps me. Certainly isn't the weather, I'll tell you that. That's another big difference.
Yeah, no, the weather is absolutely crazy. Yeah, no. Because I can imagine, being in the Southwest, and people say Texas isn't the Southwest, but geographically it is the Southwest, and so it's just very interesting weather. there. So like I said, I haven't been to Washington. It's on my list. But yeah, no, like the weather is definitely something. But I get what you're saying about it's easier just because when, I did a contract in North Dakota, and it wasn't like the small town versus the bigger area. There was a very big difference. The small town was very interesting. Whereas the bigger town, it was just, you felt like you could be yourself, you felt accepted, you felt like everything was just like, you are who you are and nobody's like upset with it. And so, yeah, no, I definitely get what you're saying. Just because like the East and like the North and the South over here, like at least on the East Coast, it's always so very like, you either, people want you to be liked, or they want you to be like, oh, I care about being liked, or, I care about, being tolerable or anything. And so, you don't really have to experience that right now. And so that's like a great kind of, Before we segue into any questions, Shanice, do you have a question or anything like that?
So one of my questions that I have is I was wondering, were there times that you felt like you were struggling to find your place both inside and outside of the drag world?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that looking at both inside and outside of the drag world, let's start with inside the drag world first. Obviously, I'm in drag, so let's start there. Yes, absolutely, because drag is a kid's game. It is for people who are younger. As I mentioned, I'm pushing 50, and there's not as many spaces that are open to you, and you don't necessarily get booked as often. And people, I think there's some assumptions that, you can't be relevant at a certain age. So I'm just fighting, I'm fighting for my place within the community even right now. And I do feel very, very out of place. At a show, as an example, it'll be me and people who are 20 years younger than me, but I live for it, right? And you constantly fight for that relevance and to be seen as relevant despite your age. And so I absolutely don't feel like I fit in necessarily. And I don't think that's bad for a drag queen, by the way. So yeah, absolutely. Like I still currently don't feel like I have a place in the community. And I think that's common for any of us who work in this space. You grow up feeling like an outsider, and I don't ever think that leaves you. And then outside of drag, absolutely, especially in my early 20s, before I came out, and I'd be early 20s. I came out when I was 21, and I was so lost, and I didn't feel like I fit in, and I didn't feel like I had a place. And I wasn't surrounded by a supportive environment. I was raised in a cult, a very, very fundamentalist cult. And I did not fit in. I did not fit in at all. And so I feel like I've spent most of my life looking for a place. And I wonder, and this is what I wonder, do we ever actually feel like we have a place, or is our whole life spent trying to find who we are and where we belong? I don't know. I'm still on that journey. So, but there are definitely times and places where I felt out of place and I feel like I don't fit in.
Yes, it does. It is a never-ending journey. If you want to cue in Kaja Gugu so he can start.
And I think that's a good thought.
It is never ending.
I think that's a good thought, though. I mean, because one of the things that you're at least taught, like in school, so one thing I was taught with like psychology, and one thing that I'm constantly taught in every psychology class I take, is that we're all fighting. So like, it's basically, and when I say this, I'm pretty sure everybody's gonna know what I'm talking about. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, basically. And so we start with the physiological, you're sleeping, you're eating, and then the next one is your safety, to physically be safe, emotionally be safe, to, be financially safe. And then that's when you start moving up the ladder to being, feeling like you actually belong to something.
Right.
And, belonging to like a family group, a relationship, to your friends. And then that's the next two ones are basically the ones of, feeling like you are, how do I describe this? It's the esteem. So you're, how you feel about yourself versus how, other people perceive you as smart and everything. That's like we're constantly fighting to be up there, where we are constantly having acceptance of ourselves, where we feel like, we're supposed to be where we're at. It's very like, it's basically saying that after you master all of those like basic needs, like your physiological, your safety, your belonging, you get to this other place where you're starting to fight for just having the self-esteem of being good or being good enough, and then feeling like you're smart enough or in that area, those last two. And so like it basically, that like whole thing always says that we're going to be fighting in that area to like be that. And so it's kind of like where you're at with drag, right? You're constantly fighting to be in that area where other people are seeing exactly how you want to be seen, where you want people to see you as accepting and see you as like, where you're physically in the space, and you, like I said, you want to be accepted and they want to accept you. So like that's kind of like the battle, which then brings me
Absolutely.
to like another question. So what challenges exist with the intersectional of queerness and in drag, and how, like, what intersectionality exists in that, or like the challenges you face? I'm sorry, that question might not be as clear.
Well, I mean, if we're going to get intersectional with it, I think that when you look at the challenges I face, and intersectionally, I don't have a lot of the same challenges other folks do who may look a little different than I, or, navigate the world different than I. But especially what I've really become very cognizant of when we look at the intersection of drag, being queer, and getting older, that's a huge challenge. And we don't talk about it a lot, especially within the queer community. And aging in the LGBTQIA plus community is not talked about. We don't discuss it. And for, in a culture that glorifies and worships youth, it can be challenging. Being older, being queer, being a drag queen, being disabled, it gets to be challenging because we're really great about talking about certain intersections, but not others. And one of those is aging. And so as I'm getting ready to hit 50, and my body isn't doing what it used to do, it presents a lot of challenges in trying to perform, run around in high heels, as as you get older. Those heels, they decrease over time.
Yeah, they go from like up there to down there. I get it.
Oh, baby, I'm in biscuit heels now.
The kitten heels, but like
I'm in
the
little
kitten
biscuit
heels are
heels.
coming back though. You see it, like the trends are like kitten heels now. I'm like, okay.
Absolutely.
But like, I get what you're saying.
But intersectionally, I think that there's a lot of things that I've struggled with related to being disabled and getting older, because it is something that we don't discuss. And if you look, like, just go out there and look at advertising that's geared and pointed towards the queer community, it's always youth driven, it's always youth beauty. There's a lot of similarities to how women are targeted in marketing as well,
The skincare, because one thing that like we can talk about right now, I mean, it's this thing where I've started seeing these weird patterns where skincare has been started to trickle down to the youth of like 12 years old, and you see them doing things that in your 30s you're supposed to be doing, so like retinol or right, like you're supposed to be doing serums, because like I have like a whole list of like the things that I do, just because like I'm 27 and like in 3 years I'm gonna be 30, and like I still look like, you know, I'm like in my early 20s, but like they're pushing like skincare and to certain heights. Like we're talking really like interesting heights, to where, I mean, there's the skincare, but then there's plastic surgery, where there's like
That part.
that, like they want to get their body done, they want to get their face done. I'm just like, and this is like, it kind of goes back to a conversation that we had yesterday with birthday, and you know, we were talking about how things are starting at like such a young age,
Yeah.
and how like what did we even say yesterday? We were talking about how going through my notes, it was basically how like marriage right now, how things are just happening so much younger. So like if you look at it like historically, we started young, where marriage was at like what, 13, 14 years old in like the 1900s, and like everything being targeted at a younger age. So even like skincare, even, you know, how you dress, the drinking, whatever, started at a younger age, then to the point where we go to a higher age, so like 21, 25, like around that, to now we're back to like the younger era, where like everything is being pushed so young and everything. And like you said, like everything is being targeted. It doesn't matter which community you look at, it's always being targeted towards the youth.
It's wild, and I don't think I was as aware. I don't think you become as sensitive to it until you're not it anymore, and then you're looking back at it. But one of the wildest things is I was on TikTok the other day, and I follow a lot of different influencers of different genres and persuasions. But I was scrolling through. My algorithm was showing me some beauty influencers, and there was this 18-year-old who was doing talking about skincare and was talking about preventative Botox, and I'm like, you're 18. Why are you even talking about Botox? But preventative Botox. And so like not even in their 20s, and they're getting, and kids are getting Botox, not because they need it, it's preventative. And part of me is like, well, I wish I had known about preventative Botox back in the day. But on the other hand, I'm also like, I'm kind of glad I didn't.
It's like, and the whole thing is like the education surrounding it was literally, because, right, being in the medical field, I learned that ideally you can't do that, just because Botox is literally putting a neurotoxin in to stop like the wrinkles in like a certain area, or to stop like the cells moving that way. And so like they would use it, just because I worked in a like urology office, so they would use it for things like what is it, not cervical, but oh my god, the cancer that men go, not pancreatic, I'm pretty sure you know, prostate cancer. And so basically they would use either Botox, or there was something where your bladder, the prolapsing of the bladder, so they would use Botox for that. And one thing I've learned is that, you know, ideally you shouldn't be using Botox if you don't need it. And I have like a skincare lady, this is like the last thing I have to say before we like go on to like something else. Is like, I have a skincare lady who literally turned me on to a specific product, or no, a specific product line in, I believe it was either South Korea, but like, they have the best skincare, because they're using it from this plant to like, I wish, you know, we should talk after, but like, it's literally like looking at what they do in other countries versus this country. It's very like right now, oh, you know, you should get preventative Botox. Or one thing I saw that's in the Black community is they're talking about like their lips, their top lips not being as out-driven as like our bottom lips. So like if you want your lips to kind of match, you can do like Botox to kind of like have that outturn. I was like, and then I started thinking, I was like, wait, am I going through that? And I was like, no, like, you don't even need to touch that. I was like, you have sickle cell, like, stop. But yeah, so basically, and like, this is like a good segue into talking about like how drag has become like a protest. And I mean, I looked up some of the history, and when we're talking about protests, we have to talk about Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, where they were the ones of like the forefront after the Stonewall. And then we got into different types of activism around there. So I believe it was, what was the other ones? It was the STAR movement, it was the ACT UP, and then there was like one other one. But these were like the forefronts because they used their backing in the world of like, being queer, and they didn't call themselves transgender back then. I guess they called themselves transvestites because that's what everybody else was calling them. Because I saw that there was something like that for Silveria, or however, I am so sorry if I'm saying your name wrong.
It's about Sylvia Rivera?
Just in case she's like in the room, like God rest her soul, but like, I like read that she would call herself a transvestite, not like a like transgender. That's just something that like happened at like the 1990s, I believe. But like talking about like the history, we should like start looking at like how drag has went from like protests from there to like now. We use you guys use drag, and how that's kind of like leveled up to that. Because from then it like started as like a form. Well, actually, I looked up the history, and this has been something that's been done since like Shakespearean dramas and ancient Greek, where they've been like, we can talk about like the start until now if I think I'm interested in that. Like how drag has actually become part of more modern day society, because it used to be where it was like this, it wasn't making fun of femininity, but like it was more a performance.
I think that to unpack the history of drag, it's very difficult because you talked about in Shakespeare's time, and a lot of people will talk about the fact that in the 16th century, men dressed up as women and performed. And I think that's accepted that it was broad. And it actually was very, very uncommon in the 16th century. In fact, it really only happened in London. It wasn't as pervasive as people think it was. And at that point, it was just to play a character, right? The first record that I know of a real sort of this counterculture movement is 1583 in France, in the court of Philip III. No, Henry III. Henri III. He was a queer king of France. He's largely been erased from history. And he had a court around him of people who enjoyed cross-dressing, and they would cross-dress and hold private performances. And they were ridiculed for it. The reason we know a lot about it is we actually see a lot of what the ambassadors were writing about him during that time period, and none of it was complimentary, because obviously, his predilection for attractive men was not accepted. And he was married, and his queen was a badass. She was what we would call back then an ally. She was down with the cross-dressing. He actually dressed her. He oversaw her fashion choices. But we see the real first record of sort of this counterculture dressing up on the DL in France in the late 16th century. But when you think about modern drag, that goes back to the late 19th century. And it was a queer person of color, actually, who first used that term and started having scheduled events where people would cross-dress and perform, and and it was in the US, and that's really the first record of sort of modern drag in America is kind of, in the late 19th century. And even at that point, it was a form of protest. It was about protesting the norms. It was about protesting society. It was also about being yourself. And it has always been a counterculture. Drag has always been a subculture, and trans people have always been involved heavily in it. And I think that's it's so important to acknowledge that you can't separate being drag from the trans community, because it has always been so close. It's been so closely linked. And it was never, I would say it has never been as accepted as it is today, up until the last 15 years. And we know exactly what happened over the last 15 years to make it that way. And that's Drag Race. We see drag now, and it's so pervasive. It's everywhere. It's on TV, it's on runways, it's on, it's on commercials, live singing, like cooking television, like you name it, drag queens are there now. And that is a result of the popularity and the mainstreaming of drag because of Drag Race. Prior to Drag Race, was not nearly as accepted. Even in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was counterculture. And it was not something that you did because it was cool, because your friend was doing it, because you saw it on TV. You did it because you walked into a queer bar, you saw somebody performing, and something about that art appealed to your soul. And you found it as a way of expression. But that expression has always been a form of protest, because you can't be a man, or let me step that back. You can't be assigned male at birth, dressed like this, and it not be transgressive, it not be a form of protest. Because just even sitting here today, and I call it a post-Drag Race world, it's still not. You and I both know there are people who get real angry if they saw me sitting up here like this. So I don't think drag has become more protest-driven or less protest-driven. I think it has always been a form of protest, just showing up, being yourself. And honestly, any time that you go against the strictures of society, it is a form of protest. And I think drag queens are the most visible because we are visible and often end up on the front lines of the marches, of the protests. And I think we get linked to it being, sort of part of the modern protest and modern activist movement. But even before the modern activist movement, drag queens were always out there. Trans women and drag queens were trans people and drag queens were always out there leading the charge. And the reason I want to be so clear about the fact that you can't separate the trans community from its contributions to drag is that a lot of those people we talk about being drag queens who were leading the resistance were actually trans women, right? And I think it is so important to acknowledge that the way we see drag, the way we see our community today, has been on the back of the trans community. And we built off of it. And we continue to build off of it. And we extract so much of what we do from the trans community, and specifically trans people of color. And I think that just being able to be yourself is in the face of what society expects, is one of the bravest forms of protest that there is. to walk in your truth, because that makes people really uncomfortable. When you can walk in your truth, and if your truth is a little bit different than the majority, that's protest.